Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. In each episode, your host Jesse Morris explores the different areas that affect change and drive revenue across your organization. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episode. Here's to the revolution.
Welcome to another day of the revolution. I'm your host, Jesse Morris, and today we're talking sales, discipline, discovery, and the lost art of shutting up with Steve Caton. Steve, so glad you're here. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks, man. It's good to be here and love the topic that we're going to tackle today, man.
I'm stoked about it. It'll be a lot of fun. So, Steve, you've made a career out of helping sellers and founders get out of their own way. You founded Altezza Solutions, a fractional sales firm built for growth stage companies, which is very timely with you and I. And then you also co-host a podcast, Whiskey is for Closers. So super awesome. You've been in the sales game for a long time. Lots of wisdom I'm excited to digging into today. And, you know, I think one of my favorite things is this whole idea of like, if you ever talk too much on the sales call, lost a deal, which is why I'm excited about this topic. You're the guy to talk through. So again, super excited to have you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, man. Well, I definitely like talking about other things besides myself, but just, fun little personal tidbits on me. Number one, I'm a proud grandpa. We had our first grandchild that was born about 18 months ago. And man, it's been a blast being a grandparent. You hear people talk about how cool it is, but you don't really appreciate it until you get to do it. And then, as you might guess, because of the name of the podcast, I'm a big fan of whiskey and bourbon, and enjoy sitting around having a good cigar and a nice glass of bourbon as often as I can do with hanging out with buds. I love the lake life. In fact, that's why we relocated back to Georgia from Colorado after 23 years in Colorado, which we love, but we just kind of missed being on a lake, so we're back on the water here in Georgia, and loving it. Love being close to the Georgia Bulldogs as well. I grew up here as a big Bulldog fan, so it's nice to be close to that as well. So there you go. There's some fun stuff on me, that's not work related.
I love it. And it's funny. My wife's from Illinois, and she always talks about missing the water, right? Which we obviously have a little bit, but it's nothing like that. We lived in Nashville for a while, and one of the things we loved was getting out to all the lakes. So you do have it made out there from a water perspective.
Yeah, it's nice, especially when it gets hot and humid. That's about the only place you can go for relief,
Yeah, that's the part I don't miss a lot about the South, but I do love the water, that's for sure. Well, hey, Today, we've got a lot of fun topics. One of the ones I think is really timely, and I make this mistake, and I think it's fun. I use Fathom for recording, and I've been watching my talk time recently. I've been running analysis on all my calls. As I've been getting back into the sales motion, I've been talking to 7 to 10 prospects a week, and it's funny, man. It's been really cool to see even my own evolution in the last 2 months of really being in the trenches here. I'm curious. You've spent a lot of time with growth stage companies. You and I used to both work at another software company at different times. So we have that overlap. We talk a lot. I think a lot of us think of it this way, but it's very rare, I would say, that we all follow it, right? Is this idea that the best sellers aren't actually the best talkers, they're the best listeners.
Yeah.
Where did this conviction come from? How did you see this evolve? Like, why do you think so many people get this wrong?
Yeah, well, the first part of the question was, where did the conviction come from? I think it's honestly, Jesse, I think it's kind of hardwired into my DNA. I don't really know at what point in my life I became very cognizant of people and their social skills, but having always been around, I've always been around a lot of people. I'm outgoing. I've put myself in social situations a lot. And so somewhere, maybe in my 20s, I don't know, I just noticed that, a lot of people love to talk about themselves. And I've always been super observant. It's just kind of the way God wired me. So I've got this observant nature. And so I would just notice, whether at parties or networking events, how the vast majority of people are talking, and then there's a few people who listen. And I married a woman who's an incredible listener. And one of the things that we noticed as we would go out with couples, early in our marriage, is that a lot, you go out to dinner with another couple and you would spend the evening kind of listening to them tell their story. And then later on, maybe the next day, you'd get a note from them that was like, that was the best evening ever. Man, we had such a great time. And my wife and I would look at each other and go, wow, we didn't really do anything but just listen. So it was something in that whole stage of life that sort of cemented the conviction in me that and when I think about the most interesting people that I've met in my life, the people who've really made a difference in my life, I find that the common thread for them is that they're amazing listeners and they ask super insightful questions. So that just kind of stuck with me as a young guy, and so when I did start doing sales, the combination of that conviction, coupled with the fact that the first guy that really trained me on how to do sales was also a really good listener and just asked super good questions. And so that was just part of my formative years, early in my career, and so I think that's where it all started for me. In terms of the second part of the question about why is it so hard for people, I think that is such a great question, and I've asked myself that a lot, and I kind of, again, analyzing it and trying to figure it out. I honestly think there's no simple answer. There's a lot of things that go into it, but I feel like in a lot of cases, salespeople they feel the pressure to get the pitch done, right? And I think that there's this, especially in a software context, it's like, man, I got to get to the demo because the demo is going to be what wins the day. If they just see it in action, that's, we're going to win. And of course, you and I both know, Jesse, that's really like the last thing that you should be doing is the demo, and only after you fully understand how the demo is going to actually relate to the things that matter to them, right? But so often we're just trained, let's go straight to the pitch, straight to the demo. And it's just how salespeople are trained in a lot of situations. And so that's how they operate.
It's interesting, again, kind of getting back into this side of it. And, I think you're right. There isn't a right, here's the reason why. But I think some of the things you highlighted, which I really love, is, the excitement. Like, I think for me, I'm very passionate, and building my own software company. I remember my first, especially couple of weeks of a lot of sales calls back to back, and I was in this state of like, I want to show everything, and I want to like convey like how we can solve their problems, and it's that conviction, which is great. But it is actually, I remember, this is funny. I remember our first call. I talked the entire call, and I never forget. I got off that call. And I'm very analytical, right? So I get off the call and I was like, Jesse, that was not a great call. Like, you did not do a good job at asking questions, listening. You got so excited about the problem you're solving and the solution to it. So it is interesting. I think there is some components to that. Within that, I'm curious, and we're going to talk about this today, because I always think about motions that can help break patterns. And it's something that, even in myself in the last couple of weeks, I've noticed a shift. Like, if you look, again, I'm hyper analytical. If I look at my data and I run every call transcript through AI now, and I've got a framework of what it's great. Actually, I have a scorecard, and one of those is, did I ask enough discovery questions, and how much did I talk versus listen? And it's been cool because it's definitely shifting more into it. I'm curious, when you think about it, and for those out here, what are some of the things that you think, one or two like helpful tips to help people just be a little bit more mindful in how they approach this topic?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I've studied a lot of different sales frameworks over the years, and I think that in a lot of cases, I think a lot of times they just, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but they're a little bit more complicated than they need to be. And then the first year that I started Altezza, I was in major networking mode, just trying to get out there and meet as many people as possible and have great conversations. And I got plugged into this organization called H7. So H is in Henry, said the number 7. And it was founded by a guy named Clay Hicks, and he's become a good friend. He developed this framework for this networking community that I thought was brilliant from a sales perspective. And it wasn't really designed for sales, but it's brilliant for sales. And he calls it the CSA framework, and it stands for connect, serve, ask. And so the framework, the way it is, it's just super simple, right? It's like if you start every conversation and you think, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is connect. So we're going to find common connections and find a way to build rapport. That's what we're going to focus on first. Let me actually get to know the human that I'm meeting with here for a few minutes. And then serve is, how do I help you? Basically, the posture is, how do I help you, Jesse, accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, or solve whatever problems that are front and center for you today. And only after that do I earn the right to ask for something in return. And what's cool about it is that when we start with connect and serve, then the person on the other end of the conversation actually wants to ask you just naturally, because they feel like, well, gosh, I've been talking about me the whole time. Well, what about you? How can I help you? So I think when you translate that into a sales conversation, it works really well, because let's build rapport first, and let's actually ask some questions that help me understand, how can I serve this person? And then we can have an ask after that takes us to whatever that next step is.
So I love it, because it's a different mentality going into a call, right? And I think, this kind of gets into a little bit of like a checkbox problem, right? Which is, hey, I think most people, and even myself, I like structure. I like having a framework for things. But intentionality is everything in a lot of ways, right? And so if you think about, I've been leading RevOps for 12 plus years, and I study sales stages and all these, how good did MedPick get filled out, and how are next steps looking, and all of the data pieces that go in. And don't get me wrong, it's all relevant, it's valuable. But I like what you just did, is this reframing of, what is the intention of today? Is it to check boxes to actually get information, or is it, to your point, to really drive that connection, to serve? And then ultimately, obviously, to get to an area that you can provide value. But that is there's an organization in Colorado Springs, a nonprofit my wife and I do a lot of work with, and they talk a lot about earn the right to be heard. And it's something that I've always stuck with me. And I think, they do that more in the context of their organization, but I think about that a lot in the sales motion. I'm curious, like, when you are coaching reps, or you're training, even your own org, you're helping consult with companies like mine, what are you listening for that tells you to hover on something and peel the onion, and really go deeper? And how do you do? And so it's a two-part question. First, what are you listening for? And then second part is, then how do you then tie that back to exactly what you just talked about around that framework?
Yeah, I think so. In that framework, the S part, the serve, is really about doing good discovery. That's where you're really learning about the person and what problems they're trying to solve. So it all depends on the context of the conversation, right? So if somebody has set up a conversation, if they've come out to our website and filled out a form and said, "Hey, I want to have a conversation," then the temptation is to think, hey, they just want to see the goods, right? Let me just show them the goods. But really, we want to slow down and say, okay, let's find out what motivated them to do that. So tell me about what brought you to the website. You filled out the form, you shared this little bit of information. Let's unpack that. Tell me a little bit more about what's going on in your organization and what you hope we might be able to solve for you. So you got to start with that question just to get them talking, right? And once they start talking, then the key is, to your point, where it's like not just looking at it as a checklist, but it's like really listening, like actively listening to what they're saying, and then being able to stop and say, hey, so Jesse, I heard you say fill in the blank. Tell me more about that. Or one of my favorite questions is, whenever I hear somebody say this, it usually means this, but is that true for you? And then, because, the way our human nature is such that if somebody makes a definitive statement one way or the other, we like to say, no, dude, you're wrong. Or, yeah, you're absolutely right. So that's a good way to say something that's definitive without being a jerk about it. You're just saying, hey, when I hear this, it normally means this, but tell me about you. Is that true for you? And, well, no, actually, it's not. Here's what's true for me. right? So it's just being able to ask strategic questions like that don't just check the box on the discovery call, but say, there's something there. Let's poke at that a little bit more. And ultimately, Jesse, I think that what we need to do as salespeople is try to figure out what does the problem mean for that individual on a personal level. Like, we really need to understand, if this problem doesn't get solved, how does that impact you personally in your role at your company? Because, dude, as we all know, we're human beings. We make decisions based on emotions, and then we use logic and data to justify it. So we really need to find out what the root emotion is that's going on for this buyer if they don't solve the problem.
Steve, I love it. My favorite thing that you said, which is really powerful, and I haven't thought about this, is hey, I heard you say this, and when I hear that, it makes me think this, but am I understanding that correctly? And I love that framing because it achieves two things. To your point, it's not boxing people in, but it's actually inviting deeper discussion. And a lot of times in sales, like, it's actually that deeper discussion is really uncover a lot of the pain points.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things, what you mentioned, the software company that we both worked at, at one point in time, when I got there, and there was a sales team there when I got there, they were only converting about 7% of the people that completed forms and actually asked for demos. They only converted about 7% of those to customers. And when I was just analyzing what was going on there, I was like, what in the heck? How do you only convert 7% of people who raise their hand saying, I want to see something? It was basically because there was none of this discussion was even happening. It was really straight to the demo with no clarity on how this piece of software was going to change somebody's life or fix a problem that they were solving. All we did was just shift it to say, hey, we're going to do a little bit of a discovery call ahead of time so we understand the problem and understand how that impacts you and your organization. Then we'll schedule a demo, and we'll talk about the software in the context of which he shared with us. So it was interesting because we slowed the whole process down by adding an additional step, but the conversion rate went to 25% almost overnight.
It's interesting behind that. We've been in a sales cycle recently where we're closing deals in 2 to 4 weeks, and close to 6-figure deals, which is quick. We've had a couple of deals in the last few weeks that have gone a little bit slower. And I was talking to my co-founder yesterday about this, and he's like, Jesse, you don't have to try to close every deal in the first 1 or 2 calls. And I said, I know that. I was like, but I like the framing mentality of, at the same time, can we get there? But if we can't, don't force it, right? And so it was interesting. I was on a prospect call earlier this morning, second week that I've had with this client or prospective client, an hour on both. So it's very longer, I would say, than what we've been used to, but it's also bigger scope that we're working through. And it's been fun, man, because we really have gotten into this motion of really understanding what they're trying to solve for in their business. And so I always think there's a balancing act to it, but I really do agree with this approach of, taking the time to make sure you actually understand what we're solving for, and not this, hey, I'm going to fit, the way we sell this 90% of the time is this way. So I'm just going to assume you're in that 90%, and I'm going to kind of steamroll forward without truly understanding. And even if actually they fall in that 90%, there's nuance in even how they do that, right? And it's how do you actually ensure that you're framing behind it?
Yeah, and by not making the assumption, you're building more trust and rapport with that buyer when you take the time to not make the assumption and actually ask them to validate it. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, this person actually does care, and here's what I'm saying. So that it's just our natural, human instinct to know. It's like, one of my favorite phrases that you've heard me say before, Jesse, is be interested instead of interesting. Like, stop trying to be the most interesting person in the room and try to be the most interested person in the room. You'll be amazed at how people will respond to that. People will definitely be leaning into that a lot more than, there's always people who get attracted to the guy or gal that has all the stories to tell, right? That's just, That's true. But in sales, I just found that being interested is definitely the long-term way to win and build relationships that last, as opposed to just transactional kind of commodity-driven conversations.
So along those lines, and I love this, you and I talked about this about a month ago. You talked about early in your career, you were really more of this relational sales guy. You could build rapport really well. But kind of along the lines, actually, what you were just talking about is it was tough sometimes getting deals across the line. I think you said a
Yeah.
coach came in and it really changed everything. Can you walk us through that story? What was broken? What did it teach you?
Yeah, that was, and it's the Doug Sherman story. So I had gone, I'd been in real estate. So that's what I had done kind of the first 11 years of my sales career was in real estate. So in real estate, it really pays to be relational, right? And, you really are selling to emotions, especially the kind of real estate I was selling, which was more second homes, escape places for Atlanta professionals to get away from the hustle and the bustle, right? So that was almost always driven by an emotional response. So I was really good at that, and I could build relationship, with people. Was, like I said earlier, I'm comfortable in social situations and I'm easy to talk to, and that paid off for me, and then I transitioned eventually into selling technology, and I was at a .com for a short period of time that did, we did well enough to get acquired, and ended up, and that's what got me to Colorado. And then that company, after it was .com .bomb, right? And I was on the back, on the front and the back of all that, and then I went to work for a company that was doing very high end wealth management. But my job at that company was to pursue institutional assets. And so I was talking to, and these were nonprofit organizations that had trust assets that needed to be managed appropriately. So I went into a very complex sales process, right? Where you had multiple stakeholders, multiple influencers, decision makers, all the things, right? Well, bro, I'd never sold anything that complex before with that many kind of moving parts. So my relational skills could get me into the room and get me to the table. But when it came down to decision time, I was losing a lot or not even getting to the finals for the decision. And I was like, what is going on? And so the CEO of this company, he had a good friend that was Doug, and he had a sales consulting organization that was working with Fortune 50, 100 companies, and at the time he was working with Boeing, actually helping them reorient their sales strategy because Airbus was kicking their butt. And so I actually got to work with this guy, and he taught me all about sales process. So up until this time, so think about it, I've been in sales probably at this point in time 15 years, maybe more, and I didn't know the first thing about sales process, and criteria that you had to have to move from one deal stage to the next, right? So he just taught me all about that. Like, well, here are the things that have to happen in order to go from discovery to qualified to value proposition confirmed to whatever the deal stages were to closed. And here are the questions that need to be answered at every stage in the process. And the reason you're not getting these deals closed is because there's some really key things that you're not asking about, and it was all in discovery is where I was dropping the ball. So things like decision process, like what is the decision process? Who are the stakeholders? Who does make the decision? And what are the criteria? Like didn't have any of that. It was just me flying by the seat of my pants on my relational skills. And that was not going to win the day in that kind of sales motion. So that was a very pivotal moment for me because I felt like once I understood the discipline and rigor of process and then coupled that with the relational skills I had, it was like, bro, that just opened up a whole new world for me.
I think along those lines, a part of that is being willing to change and adapt and learn new habits ultimately, right? I think
Yeah.
a lot of the listeners today, I think all of us would probably agree that, hey, listening sounds great, right? I think all of us would say that. I think probably various levels would say, I'm really great at listening. And then I would say some of us know maybe it's a harder area, especially in the sales motion itself. I'm curious around those lines, like, how did you train yourself? I think about a gym, right? So I go into the gym and you're like, hey, I want to work out today, right? You haven't worked out in maybe 6 months. You forgot actually what proper form looks like, all of that. Part of it is showing up, right? We talk a lot about that, like just the willingness to show up to the gym can make a big impact. But then part of it is
Yeah.
also this willingness to lean in and learn, how to do things better or different or improve upon yourself. I'm curious, when you think about muscle memory and really training yourself in these new areas, like that was 15 years of doing something the same way or, similar way you had always done it. Like, how did you go through that process and how do you help people get through that as they try to evolve and change within their own sales motion?
Yeah, man, I tell you, there's a lot there. So I think the first piece of it, just like Simon Sinek says, it all starts with why.
Mhm.
I think the why really matters. So for me, the why for me was, look, I have big dreams, for my family and what I wanted to do and what I wanted to accomplish in terms of being able to provide for my wife and my kids and things we wanted to do. And it's like, okay, so the job that I was in, sales, I knew could get me to that why, could help me achieve that why, but not the way I was doing it, right? And so I understood that, and so it was like, okay, well, my why is powerful enough to motivate me to want to do things differently because the way I'm doing it today isn't going to get me there. So that's where it starts. I think we all have to have that inner kind of drive that's driven by the why. And then once you got the why and you're like, okay, now what's the how? I think the mistake that we make is, okay, I got my why. Now let me go figure out the how. For me, it was more about the who. So I started with who before the how. And I was like, who can I hang out with that can teach me these things that I need to know? So going back to your example of the gym, I don't know about you, man, but for me, my best workouts happen with other people. When I've got another, dude that I'm working out with and we're pushing each other, that workout's going to go a hell of a lot better than just me doing it by myself in my home, gym. Right. So I think it was for me, I knew that I'm going to get better by surrounding myself with people who are better than me. So I just went out looking for those people. And, Doug was one of them, but he wasn't the only one. And I just tried to surround myself with people who were really, really good at sales and learn as much, just try to sit and soak up all I could like a sponge from them. And then I would take the bits and pieces that I heard from them and say, okay, now I'm going to apply that in the how for me based on how it feels right for me, right? Because we all have a little bit of a different personality and a little bit of a different vibe. And so we have to take those things that we see other people do and go, here's what that looks like to apply it for me. And then it's just the reps. After that, it's just all about the reps. There's no substitution for the reps.
I think you're right, Steve. And one of the phrases that I think a lot about is the "what got you here won't get you there," right? And it's something
Yeah.
that I have to tell myself even regularly now at this point of hey, some of the emotions and things that maybe made you successful, or it's kind of like your example earlier in the wealth management high end thing. Like you had success in sales. Uh, it was a different motion and how you did it, but you kind of had that epiphany of hey, what got me here is not going to get me to where I need to get to, and that really ties into that why. And I love this idea of the who, and it's something that I don't probably think enough about. And I think for some of us, it's actually hard because you're trying to find those people because it's weirdly enough, and I think you probably have seen this as well. Like those of us in our career that you know progress, and I would say it's like lonely at the top, and you continue to
Hmm.
grow and progress. Like it's harder, I think, to surround yourself and find people that have that commonality. But you're right. I mean, it makes a huge impact. Going to the gym analogy, working with somebody. Same thing in selling. I have my first client that we landed here at our company. He's also I've built a great relationship with him. We're really good friends now, and we talk a couple times a week, and it's some about their work, but it's actually a lot of just about sales and the motion, and it there is a different energy when you've got kind of somebody else that's in the trenches that is also, I mean, he's by far better than me at some. He's a sales leader, so he's a lot better than me at it, and that's been impactful in how we do it. And I really makes it. And I like that you didn't just, to your point, jump to the how, because I think there is something around, hey, I'm gonna watch, I'm gonna observe, I'm gonna learn from these individuals. I might not take it all. I might not, I got to make this work for how I operate, but really making those
Yeah.
adjustments can be huge.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to your point about, what got you here won't necessarily get you there. That principle plays out in so many contexts. Like you and I are both, founders of businesses, right? And I know from, again, before I started a business of my own again, I needed to go hang out with people who have done it. So I kind of practiced the same motion again and went and surrounded myself with some who's. And I remember one of the guys said, here's what you need to know, Steve. It's going to be harder than shit to get to $1 million. And then when you get to $1 million of AR, you're going to have to break everything and do it completely different if you want to get to five. And then the same thing's going to happen if you want to get to 10. And I was just sitting there going, holy cow, man, what am I signing up for here? But, but at the end of the day, that's how life works in so many contexts, right? It's like, if we're going to keep growing and getting bigger and better, we got to keep reinventing ourselves.
So when you're looking, Steve, at training not only your sellers in your company, but also, organizations like mine, and you're coaching, this approach, I'm sure you start with the same framework concept, but again, what are some of those, like, for those listening today and they're thinking, hey, I want to make a change. So I know my why, I've been having a rough couple of quarters or whatever the case, or maybe I just am not, like, for me, it's, I, and it's ridiculous, is the high achiever in me. It's like, I want to close better than 60%. I want to close at 80%, which, some people would say, like,
Yeah.
why is that a goal? But for me, it's like, I just want to keep getting better. It's that mentality.
Yeah.
What are some of
Yeah.
those things? Like, if you're walking into the gym, for lack of a better analogy, but the sales motion, and you're like, hey, let's just start with two things. Like, go into this meeting, like every meeting you have this week, what are the, one or two things that somebody could literally get off of this podcast and go and do tomorrow to help with some of that muscle memory to start even working towards this capability?
Yeah, that's really good, Jesse. I think, so, I mean, the framework we talked about earlier that kind of connect, serve, ask is a good cadence to try to remember. I think for me, this is for me personally. So I'm speaking to what worked for me. I think one of the mantras that I still have to remind myself of all the time is from the Navy SEALs, which is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Because I'm an activator, right? And I just want to go, 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 go. And I want to get to the wins. I want to spike the football and celebrate and then go to the next one. It's just the way I'm wired. And when I get, I'm a visionary. So I get new ideas. I'm ready to just go and implement, or go talk to my team and have them implement. And I know that's gonna create a lot of chaos if I just operate that way all the time. So for me, it's just taking a breath and understanding, okay, slow down, process things and think that they'd be more thoughtful. And then by doing that, it actually is going to speed things up, because the slowing down allows us to be more intentional with how we show up and whatever the opportunity is, right? Whether it's a sales conversation or an investor conversation or whatever the case may be, the slowing down and then the physical change that happens in your body when you just take a breath and take a beat and slow down, I think is super, super helpful in many contexts. But for me personally, for sales, that was a key thing for me to always remember. And then even in the middle of the day, because sometimes you get into the pace and you're just rapid fire. And then so sometimes, get up, walk outside, take a breath and remember, okay, this is great, having a good day, but let me slow things down a little bit. It's just, for me, that was really, really important to remember all the time.
So, I think it's interesting, the take a breath concept. Everybody uses that phrase. I think most of us would agree it's a concept. I wonder how many, put it, and even myself. So it's funny, I have this app that I use, and this is ridiculous, but I love it. It's called Clear Space. and clear space before I can access any app on my phone. I actually have to breathe. You don't have to, but it tells you to breathe, right? So it's like, and I can
Yeah.
put points of friction depending on the app. So if I want to get on LinkedIn, I have a 15-second breath exercise that I have to do on my phone to get into LinkedIn. If I want to get on Instagram, I have a 45-second breath exercise that I have to do to get through. And it's been actually really powerful because it actually inserts breath as a natural thing into the day. And I've even been doing this with my kids actually every morning, because I'll go out on the porch when I get downstairs when I wake up, and we do 10 breaths, 10 deep breaths out on the porch. Ideally, especially in the winter when it's cold, we like to go out and do it actually just like no jackets or anything. And it's been a really powerful thing. It's funny, not only like my actually breathing capacity has increased by 40% over the last year. The way I know that is I have asthma. So like my allergist, my immunologist was like, "How did you do this?" And I was like, "Breathing, like that's it." But I actually think there's a lot in the breathing part of what you just said that I think a lot of people gloss over, and it's hard. It's hard in our motion to actually remember to do it. But there is something powerful in that intentionality of inserting it. And even in like, as a leader, my last company, I had 31 people in my org that were, reported up under RevOps for me. And, that's a lot of personalities. That's a lot of, challenges. And I'm a go-getter, similar to you, but there are those moments where your point is exactly it, slow and smooth. Like I have to take that breath of like, okay, breathe, let's process. And then even that, that awkward pause, I think has a lot of power to it.
Yeah, and it's really difficult in sales, right? Because sales is always driven. A lot of times, the sales leaders, sales managers are driving really hard in terms of how many dials did you make today, how many proposals did you get out this week. It's all numbers driven, and then you've got the added pressure of competition with other salespeople on the team, plus your own self-imposed, competitive spirit. There's a lot of reasons to not be able to slow down and breathe when you're in sales, especially. And it's a what have you done for me lately, world that we live in, right? So we're constantly feeling that pressure. So I think that having the intentionality to do that makes a huge difference. But it's really hard to do. It's a challenge.
So I'm curious. We've talked a lot, Steve, about founders and sales motions around that. You and I've especially talked a lot about that in the last few months with my business.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like when you look at these founder-led businesses, like, do you feel like, you see more with founders because again, they're, it's their baby, right? There's this different level of ownership and, I designed most of our products, right? Like, a lot of this, so there's a different level of passion and drive behind it. Do you see that pretty common in the founders in their own sales motions?
The passion piece,
and just again having a harder like wanting to talk more, not listen as much because they get so excited behind what they're actually solving for.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, for sure, it's very near and dear to their heart. I mean, you were kind of beating yourself up a little bit earlier when you were talking about our first conversation and how you talk most of the time. But let's be honest. I asked you a couple of questions, and it basically triggered that passion that you have for what you're doing, and you just shared, and time went by really fast, and then you felt bad about it. But for me, I'm like, this was awesome because I learned a lot. And so because founders have that passion, if someone just asks them to share the story, there's going to be a lot there. And I think that's a really good thing. But we have to remember if we're the founder and we're trying to help somebody with our product or service, we need to be the first one to ask the question and let the other person get their passion and energy out. And then that's going to give us they're going to give us the permission to do the same. We just have to remember, hey, I'm going to get my turn to talk about what we do, but I have to start with you because we're here to help you, not me. So if we just remember again, just to slow down and say, okay, I'm getting ready to meet with Jesse. I'm going to ask about him, and if the whole conversation ends up being about him, I'm good with that, and just take the pressure off. I think when we think of sales as serving people, it takes the pressure off of, oh, I got to be a great closer. I got to be a great closer. No, you just have to be someone who's good at serving other people, whether that means it's you might be able to serve them or somebody else might be able to serve them. But the point is, how can I serve this person? And if we take that posture, then it'll be easier for us to shut up and listen, right? Shut up and sell.
So I think, your framework now, the way you phrase it there, I think it does unlock more, because again, to your point, it is a reshifting of the mentality of how you approach conversations, and that serving approach first. Yeah, it really does reframe, I think, a lot. I'm like thinking through now how I can incorporate it, which I really like. For sales leaders that are listening to this, and you've been a sales leader for a number of years, how do you coach this and encourage this within your teams?
Well, this will be, consistent theme that you'll hear here, Jesse, is for me, finding salespeople that first and foremost care about serving was the first thing. So when I was interviewing and choosing people for the team, I didn't always just go based on the resume and all the accomplishments and the bona fides in the resume. I was really trying to get to the heart of the human and what do they care about and who are they really, and are they really in sales because they love helping people, or are they in sales just because they want to make a bunch of money? And there's nothing wrong with making a bunch of money, but it's what's driving it, right? So I would start with that, and then once I knew I had somebody that had that servant's heart, then the training piece became easier, because then it was just a matter of teaching them how to do it in a way that really taps into who they are in the first place, right? They're a servant. They want to help people. So let me teach them how to sell in a way that aligns with who they are and, kind of their heartbeat. And then I'd say the other piece of it was, again, going back to what I was talking about with the why. I would always take time to figure out the why behind all the people that reported to me. I wanted to know what were their life dreams and aspirations? What were the things that kept them up at night? And how can we connect the dots to the performance that they have at work doing sales and the ability to accomplish the goals and dreams they have for their family? Bro, if you can do that and then you just show them the framework to get there, I mean, not only are they going to be really successful, but they'll also run through a wall for you too, because they know you care about them.
Great advice.
As a sales leader, I think as a sales leader, that the biggest compliment I ever got from people that work for me was, "Bro, I know you really care about me, and that matters."
I think it's great advice, and I think it's something for us to take away as something to be mindful through. And I do love the fact that you went into it. Actually starts in the hiring process of identifying people that actually align to these same values, which I think is something that, don't get me wrong, obviously we love winning. It's part of why I think we like sales. But to your point, what's the why behind driving a lot of that, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I think when founders ask me about the biggest mistake that I see founders make when they're making sales hires, especially the first sales hire, I'll tell them, you don't hire for core value fit. You hire strictly based on the resume, and you ignore the values piece of it, and then you end up with somebody who might be able to sell, but you can't stand being around them. That's not good. So values really matters. Yeah.
Well, hey, I know we're at time here. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for being willing to dig in and share some of the perspectives here. Really appreciate you taking the time out.
Yeah, man. It was really a conversation that's near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate you, bringing it out, man. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Those listening, you can follow Steve on LinkedIn or check out his Whiskey is for Closers podcast. If you haven't liked and subscribed, feel free to. But again, really appreciate you taking the time out. Have a great rest of the day.